a child's desperate plea in a frozen wasteland, a woman who refuses to speak, and a mark on a little girl's neck that proves some secrets can't stay buried forever. When rancher Ethan Cole opened his door to find a 4-year-old begging him to take in a stranger, he never imagined that one act of mercy would unravel the life he'd spent years trying to forget. Because the woman standing silent in the snow wasn't a stranger at all, and the child pleading for shelter was carrying his blood. Stay with me until the end of this story. Hit that like button and comment your city below so I can see how far this tale has traveled. The wind that January evening didn't howl, it screamed. Ethan Cole stood at his kitchen window, watching the snow devour the last traces of the fence line. 20 acres of Montana wilderness, and every inch of it was disappearing under white. He'd weathered worse storms in his 34 years, survived colder nights, endured longer silences. But something about this particular darkness felt different, heavier, like the sky itself was holding its breath. He poured himself another cup of coffee, the third since sunset, and tried to ignore the gnawing emptiness that had become his only companion. The ranch house was too big for one man, always had been. His father built it for a family of 8. Ethan rattled around in it alone, his footsteps echoing off walls that remembered laughter he could barely recall. The knock came just after 9. 3 sharp raps against wood, almost swallowed by the wind. Ethan froze, cup halfway to his lips. Nobody traveled in weather like this. Nobody sane, anyway. The nearest neighbor was 7 miles east, and old Samuel Pritchard had more sense than to venture out in a blizzard for anything short of death itself. The knock came again. More insistent this time. Ethan set down his coffee and moved toward the door, his hand instinctively touching the rifle mounted above the frame. He'd learned long ago that unexpected visitors in isolated country rarely brought good news. His fingers wrapped around the cold metal, lifting it down with practiced ease. "Who's there?" he called out, his voice rough from disuse. No answer. Just the wind, and beneath it, was that crying? Ethan's grip tightened on the rifle as he unlatched the door. The wind hit him like a fist, driving snow into his face, stealing his breath. He squinted against the assault, raising one arm to shield his eyes. And then he saw her. A child. Small enough that the snow had already drifted halfway up her legs. She wore a coat that might have fit her a year ago, but now hung threadbare and insufficient against the cold. Her face was pale, lips tinged blue, dark hair plastered against her cheeks by melting snow. But she wasn't crying. Despite the tears frozen on her face, despite the way her small body shook with cold, she stood straight and met his eyes with a determination that seemed impossible for someone so young. "Please, sir," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "She can cook. Please take her in." It was only then that Ethan noticed the woman. She stood 3 feet behind the child, barely visible through the swirling snow. Taller than average, wrapped in a dark cloak that the wind whipped around her like restless wings. Her head was bowed, face hidden in shadow, and she hadn't moved or spoken. She simply stood there, as still as a grave marker, while the storm raged around her. "What in the—" Ethan started, then caught himself. The child was watching him with those impossibly steady eyes, waiting. "Get inside, both of you, now." He expected relief, gratitude, maybe tears. Instead, the little girl just nodded once, as if she'd never doubted he would let them in, and turned to take the woman's hand. "Come on," the child said, tugging gently. He said yes. The woman moved like someone walking through water, slow and deliberate, as if each step required careful consideration. She kept her head down as she climbed the porch steps, and when she passed close enough for Ethan to see her face, she quickly turned away. But not quickly enough. For just a moment, lamplight from inside caught her features, pale skin, delicate bones, dark eyes that flickered toward him, and then away with something that looked like fear or shame, or both. She was younger than he'd first thought, maybe late 20s, with the kind of fragile beauty that seemed out of place in this harsh country. And familiar. Achingly, impossibly familiar. Ethan stepped back to let them enter, his mind racing. He knew that face. He was certain of it. But from where? When? The memory danced just out of reach, like trying to recall a dream upon waking. The woman moved immediately to the far corner of the room, as far from him as the space allowed. She kept her eyes fixed on the floor, her hands clasped tight in front of her. The child, meanwhile, stood in the center of the room, taking everything in with curious eyes that seemed too knowing for her age. "Thank you, sir," the little girl said, her teeth chattering now that she was out of the wind. "We won't be trouble. She's real good at cooking and cleaning, and I can help too. I'm 4.5. Ethan closed the door against the storm and leaned the rifle back against the wall. Up close, in the lamplight, the child's condition was even more alarming. Her lips were still blue, her fingers an unhealthy white where they peeked out from sleeves too short for her arms. Frostbite. Another hour in that storm and she might have lost fingers. Or worse. 4.5, he repeated, moving to stir up the fire. That's pretty old. Almost 5, she said seriously. My birthday's in spring. What's your name? Nora. She glanced back at the woman. And that's Miss Eliza. She takes care of me. Miss Eliza. Ethan's eyes moved to the silent woman in the corner. She still hadn't looked up, hadn't acknowledged him in any way beyond that one brief, furtive glance. Her hands were trembling, from cold or fear, he couldn't tell. Miss Moore, he said, his voice gentler than intended. You're safe here. I'm not going to hurt you. A slight flinch, barely perceptible, but no other response. She don't talk much, Nora offered, shuffling closer to the fire. But she understands everything. Doesn't talk much or can't talk at all? Ethan wondered. And what kind of woman dragged a child through a blizzard to knock on a stranger's door? How long have you been traveling? He asked, directing the question to Nora since Eliza seemed incapable of answering. 3 days, Nora said. We walked from Silver Creek. Silver Creek? Ethan's eyebrows shot up. That's 40 miles from here. Miss Eliza carried me sometimes when I got tired. Nora's voice was matter-of-fact, as if trekking 40 miles through winter wilderness was perfectly ordinary. We slept in a barn one night and under a tree another night. Last night we didn't sleep at all because the snow started. 40 miles. 3 days. With a child. In January. Ethan looked again at the woman called Eliza, seeing her now with new eyes. Her cloak was torn in several places. Her boots, visible beneath the hem of her dress, were worn nearly through. And yet she'd made it here, had kept this child alive through conditions that would have killed most grown men. Running, he thought. They were running from something. You need to get out of those wet clothes, Ethan said, addressing both of them but looking at Nora. I've got spare shirts that'll swim on you, but they're dry. And blankets. When's the last time either of you ate? Yesterday morning, Nora said. Miss Eliza gave me the last of the bread. Gave you the last of the bread, which meant Eliza herself hadn't eaten in more than 24 hours, maybe longer. She'd starved herself to keep the child fed. Ethan moved to the kitchen, his mind working through logistics. Food first, warmth, then questions, though he suspected those questions wouldn't get him very far with a woman who wouldn't speak and a child too young to understand what she was running from. He pulled out what remained of the stew he'd made 2 days earlier, venison, potatoes, carrots from the root cellar. It wasn't fancy, but it was hot, and there was plenty of it. He set the pot on the stove to warm and turned to find Nora standing right behind him, having followed with the silent determination of a shadow. Can I help? She asked. You can sit down before you fall down, Ethan said, pulling out a chair. And tell me how you knew to come here. Nora climbed into the chair, her feet dangling well above the floor. Miss Eliza knew. She said you'd help us. She said that? Ethan glanced toward the corner where Eliza remained frozen. Out loud? Nora's small face scrunched in thought. She wrote it. She writes things sometimes when she needs to tell me important stuff. So not completely mute, just selective, or traumatized, or hiding. And what else did she write? Ethan asked, keeping his voice casual as he stirred the stew. That you were a good man. That you'd lost people too, so you'd understand. Nora's eyes, dark and serious, fixed on him. Did you lose people, Mr. Cole, Ethan Cole? And yeah, kid, I lost people. Your family? The question delivered with such innocent directness hit harder than Ethan expected. His hand stilled on the spoon. Something like that. That's sad, Nora said simply. But Miss Eliza says sometimes losing people makes you kinder, 'cause you remember what it feels like. Ethan had to turn away, pretending to search for bowls so the child wouldn't see his face. What kind of life had this little girl lived to speak about loss and grief with such casual wisdom? What had she witnessed? What had been done to her, or to the woman who protected her? He ladled stew into 2 bowls and brought them to the table. Nora dove in immediately, eating with the single-minded focus of someone who'd forgotten what it felt like to be full. Ethan watched for a moment, then carried the second bowl to where Eliza stood. "Miss Moore," he said quietly, stopping a respectful distance away. "You need to eat." She didn't move, didn't acknowledge him. "The child is safe," he continued, "and you will be too, whatever you're running from. But you can't take care of her if you collapse. So please, eat." For a long moment, nothing. Then, slowly, Eliza's eyes lifted. Just enough for him to see them, deep brown, haunted, filled with exhaustion and wariness, and something else he couldn't quite name. They met his for barely a second before dropping again, but in that brief connection, Ethan felt something stir in his memory. A fragment of recognition, stronger this time, but still maddeningly out of reach. Eliza reached out with trembling hands and took the bowl. She didn't sit, didn't look at him again, but she ate standing there in the corner, each spoonful measured and careful, as if even accepting food was a calculated risk. Ethan returned to the kitchen and poured himself more coffee he didn't need. His mind was turning over possibilities, trying to make sense of what he'd let into his house. A mute woman and a child running from something 40 miles away, coming to him specifically because Eliza thought he'd help. But how did she know him? How did she know where to find him? He'd lived alone on this ranch for 6 years, kept to himself, made no friends, and few acquaintances. He went into town once a month for supplies, and spoke to no one beyond what was necessary. He was, by design and preference, invisible. So why did this woman know him? And why, despite all his instincts telling him this was complicated and dangerous, did he feel compelled to protect them? "Mr. Cole?" Nora's voice pulled him from his thoughts. She'd finished her stew and was watching him with those unsettling, too wise eyes. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure, kid." "Do you believe in family?" The question caught him off guard. "What do you mean?" "Miss Eliza says family isn't always who you're born to. She says sometimes family is who chooses to stay." Nora tilted her head, studying him. "Do you think that's true?" Ethan gripped his coffee cup tighter. "Yeah," he said after a moment. "I think that's true." "Good." Nora nodded, satisfied. "Then maybe we can be your family, just for a little while, until the bad man stops looking." The bad man. There it was. Confirmation of what Ethan had suspected. They were running from someone. Someone bad enough that a woman would risk death in a blizzard to escape him. "Nora," Ethan said carefully, "who's the bad man?" But before the child could answer, Eliza moved. Fast, urgent, crossing the room to place a hand on Nora's shoulder. She shook her head sharply, her meaning clear. "Don't tell." Nora's face fell. "But Mr. Cole should know." Another shake of the head, more emphatic. "Okay," Nora sighed. "We won't talk about it." Eliza's shoulders sagged with relief. She squeezed Nora's shoulder once, gently, then retreated back to her corner. Ethan wanted to push, wanted answers, but he recognized trauma when he saw it. Whatever they were running from, it had scared Eliza badly enough that she'd rather face the unknown danger of a strange man than let that information slip. Pushing now would only make her bolt storm or no storm. "All right," he said, setting down his cup with deliberate calm. "No more questions tonight. Let's get you both properly warmed up. I'll find some dry clothes." He disappeared into what had once been his parents' bedroom, a space he rarely entered anymore, and dug through the old trunk at the foot of the bed. His mother's dresses were still here, packed carefully in tissue paper that smelled of cedar and thyme. He pulled out the simplest one, a dark blue wool that might fit Eliza, and added one of his own flannel shirts for Nora. When he returned to the main room, he found Nora asleep in the chair, her head pillowed on her arms. The child had finally surrendered to exhaustion. Eliza stood beside her, one hand resting protectively on the girl's back, But her eyes were on Ethan, wary, watchful. "For you," he said quietly, holding out the dress. "It was my mother's, and the shirt is for Nora. The bedroom there," he gestured to a door on the left. "You can change in there. There's a bed. Both of you should sleep." Eliza hesitated, then slowly reached out and took the clothes. Her fingers brushed his for just a moment, and Ethan felt a jolt of something he couldn't name. Recognition? Memory? Whatever it was, it left him unsettled. Eliza gathered the sleeping child in her arms, lifting her with surprising strength for someone so slight, and carried her toward the bedroom. At the threshold, she paused and looked back at Ethan. Just for a second. And in that look, he saw something that made his chest tighten, gratitude, but also fear. And beneath both, something deeper, something that looked almost like grief. Then she was gone, the door closing softly behind her. Ethan stood alone in his kitchen, listening to the wind hammer at the walls, and wondered what in the name of heaven he'd just invited into his life. He moved to the window and stared out at the white darkness. The storm showed no signs of letting up. They'd be snowed in for days at least, possibly a week. No one in or out. Which meant whoever they were running from couldn't reach them. But it also meant Ethan was trapped here with two strangers and a growing certainty that nothing about this situation was what it seemed. He let the curtain fall and turned back to the empty room. The fire crackled, the wind howled, and somewhere in the bedroom, a woman who wouldn't speak and a child who spoke too well were sleeping in his mother's old bed. Ethan poured himself one more cup of coffee and settled into his father's chair by the fire. He wouldn't sleep tonight. Couldn't. Not with so many questions and so few answers. But one thing he knew for certain, he'd seen that woman before. He'd looked into those dark eyes in another life, another time. And when he finally remembered where and when, he suspected his carefully constructed solitude was going to shatter into pieces he could never put back together. Outside, the storm raged on. Inside, Ethan Cole sat watch over two refugees from a past that was reaching out to claim him whether he was ready or not. And on the neck of a sleeping child, just visible above the collar of an oversized flannel shirt, was a small birthmark. Crescent-shaped, distinctive. The same mark Ethan's father had carried. The same mark Ethan himself bore on his own shoulder. A family mark. Passed down through generations of Cole blood. But that was impossible. Ethan had no family, no children. He'd never... The memory hit him like a punch to the gut. 7 years ago. Silver Creek. A summer dance. A girl with dark eyes and a shy smile who'd looked at him like he was worth something. Margaret. Margaret with the quiet voice and gentle hands. Margaret who'd left town suddenly that fall, her family offering no explanation beyond family business back east. Margaret, whose last name he'd never learned because they'd only had one perfect night before she vanished from his life. Ethan's hand started shaking. The coffee cup slipped from his fingers, shattering on the floor, but he barely noticed. He stood and moved toward the bedroom door, his heart pounding. Pressed his palm against the wood, but didn't open it. Couldn't. Because if he was right, if the woman sleeping in that room was Margaret, then the child was his daughter. And every year he'd spent alone. Every day he'd told himself he'd never have a family. Every moment he'd believed himself beyond redemption or love. All of it had been a lie built on loss he'd never understood. Ethan backed away from the door, his breath coming too fast. The room spun. He grabbed the edge of the table to steady himself. A daughter. He had a daughter. The question wasn't why they'd come to him. The question was why it had taken them so long. And what had happened in the years between to make Margaret, Eliza, whatever name she was using, so afraid that she couldn't even speak. What had been done to her? What had she endured? And what kind of danger were they still in? Ethan's vision cleared, his mind sharpening with sudden focus. Whatever had happened, whatever was coming, he knew one thing with absolute certainty. He would not lose them again. He would not let them be taken. Not by storm, not by distance, and not by whatever bad man had sent them running into the wilderness. He'd lost them once through ignorance and circumstances beyond his control. He would not lose them again. The storm could rage, the past could come knocking, the whole world could show up at his door demanding answers. It didn't matter, they were home now. They were his to protect. And Ethan Cole, who'd spent 6 years running from connection and hiding from hope, was done running. Whatever came next, he would face it. For them. For his family. The realization settled over him like armor. Heavy, but necessary. Protective. He moved to clean up the broken coffee cup, his hand steady now despite the earthquake happening in his chest. Outside, the storm howled its fury at the world. Inside, a man who'd believed himself forever alone was learning what it meant to have something worth fighting for. In the bedroom, Nora slept deeply, curled against the woman who'd carried her 40 miles through winter. And Eliza, Margaret, whoever she truly was, lay awake in the darkness, listening to the storm and the silence, wondering if this isolated rancher could truly be their salvation, or if she'd made a terrible mistake in coming here. Only time would tell. And they had nothing but time now, trapped together by snow and secrets and blood ties that refused to stay buried. The long night stretched ahead, full of questions that would have to wait for dawn. But dawn would come eventually. It always did. And with it, truths that could no longer be hidden. Morning came late, filtered through layers of gray cloud and falling snow. Ethan hadn't slept. He'd spent the night in his father's chair, watching the bedroom door and wrestling with memories that refused to settle into coherent shapes. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Margaret's face from 7 years ago, young, hopeful, unmarked by whatever suffering had stolen her voice. And every time he opened them, he remembered the haunted woman who'd stood in his doorway, unable or unwilling to meet his gaze. The same person. They had to be. But so changed that part of him still wanted to deny it, to insist he was seeing patterns where none existed, connecting dots that had no business being connected, except for the mark on Nora's neck, that crescent moon that branded her as his blood. The bedroom door opened just after dawn. Nora emerged first, still wearing his oversized flannel shirt like a dress, her dark hair tangled from sleep. She spotted Ethan immediately and offered him a tentative smile. "Good morning, Mr. Cole." "Morning." His voice came out rougher than intended. "Sleep okay?" "Best sleep in forever," Nora said, padding across the floor in bare feet. "Your bed is so soft and warm, and the blankets smell like sunshine." "Cedar, actually." His mother had always kept cedar sachets in the linen chest. But sunshine worked too. Eliza appeared in the doorway behind Nora, and Ethan's breath caught. She was wearing his mother's blue dress, and it fit her almost perfectly. His mother had been tall too, slender like Eliza. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple braid, revealing the delicate line of her neck and jaw. In the pale morning light, without the shadows and storm to hide behind, she looked even more like the girl from his memories. But her eyes, those eyes that had once looked at him with such open affection, now held nothing but wariness. She kept one hand on Nora's shoulder, ready to pull the child back at any sign of danger. "I made coffee," Ethan said, "because what else did you say to a woman who might be the mother of your child, but wouldn't speak to confirm it? And I can make breakfast, eggs, bacon, biscuits if you don't mind waiting." Nora's face lit up. "You have bacon?" "Some. Smoked it myself last fall." "Miss Eliza makes the best biscuits," Nora announced. "Light as clouds. That's what the—" She stopped abruptly, glancing up at Eliza, who'd tightened her grip on the child's shoulder. "I mean, that's what I think. They're light as clouds." What had she been about to say? That's what the husband thought? The master? The man they were running from? Ethan stood carefully, moving slow so as not to spook them. "If Miss Moore wants to make biscuits, she's welcome to use anything in the kitchen. But she doesn't have to earn her keep. You're not servants here. You're guests." Eliza's eyes flickered to his face, held for just a moment, then dropped away. But in that moment, Ethan saw something shift, a tiny crack in the wall she'd built around herself. Not trust, not yet, but maybe the first fragile beginning of it. "Can I help make breakfast?" Nora asked, already moving toward the kitchen. "I can crack eggs. Miss Eliza taught me. I only get shells in them sometimes now." "Then you're already better at it than I am," Ethan said, following her. "I get shells in them every time." Nora giggled, the first truly childlike sound he'd heard from her, and the brightness of it seemed to surprise even her. She clapped a hand over her mouth, eyes wide, as if she'd done something wrong. Ethan's jaw tightened. What kind of life had this child led, where laughter felt like a transgression? "It's okay to laugh here," he said gently. It's okay to be loud, to run around, to be a kid. Nobody's going to punish you for it." Nora lowered her hand slowly, studying his face with those two serious eyes. "Promise?" "Promise." She nodded once, filing this information away like she'd done with everything else. Cataloging rules, testing boundaries, learning what was safe and what wasn't. Ethan wondered how many homes she'd lived in, how many sets of rules she'd had to memorize, how many times she'd been punished for simply being a child. Eliza moved into the kitchen, her steps hesitant but purposeful. She surveyed the space with quick efficiency, taking in the wood stove, the dry sink, the shelves of supplies, and then looked at Ethan with a question in her eyes. "Flour's in that tin," he said, pointing. "Lard in the crock. Baking powder on the second shelf. Use whatever you need." She dipped her head in acknowledgement and set to work. Her movements were practiced, economical, the actions of someone who'd spent years in kitchens. She measured flour without measuring cups, cut lard into the mix with her fingers, added water by feel rather than measure. Within minutes, she had dough forming, her hands working it with gentle efficiency. Ethan busied himself with the bacon and eggs, hyper-aware of her presence just a few feet away. He wanted to ask her questions, wanted to demand answers, but he could feel her tension like a living thing. One wrong word and she'd bolt. He was certain of it. So instead he worked in silence, letting Nora's chatter fill the space between them. The child had opinions about everything: the way bacon sizzled, the color of the egg yolks, the proper way to set a table. She talked enough for all three of them, and Ethan suspected that was intentional. That Nora had learned to fill silences, to smooth over awkward moments, to make herself useful and pleasant so that maybe, just maybe, she'd be allowed to stay. The realization made his chest ache. Eliza's biscuits went into the oven, and the smell that began to fill the kitchen was achingly familiar. Ethan closed his eyes for just a moment, and he was 27 again, standing in a different kitchen, watching a young woman make biscuits while she hummed softly and smiled at him over her shoulder. "You'll love these," she'd said. "My grandmother's recipe, secret ingredient." "What's the secret?" he'd asked, moving closer, drawn to her warmth. "If I told you, it wouldn't be a secret anymore." She'd laughed then, bright and unguarded, and he'd thought he could listen to that laugh forever. But there had been no forever. Just one summer, brief and bright, before she'd disappeared without explanation or goodbye. "Mr. Cole?" Nora's voice pulled him back. "The eggs are burning." Ethan swore under his breath and pulled the pan off the heat. The edges were crispy but salvageable. He plated them up along with the bacon, and by the time he'd finished, Eliza was pulling golden brown biscuits from the oven. They sat at the table, Nora chattering happily, Eliza silent and careful, Ethan trying not to stare at the woman who might hold all the answers he needed. The food was good. Better than good. Eliza's biscuits were exactly as he remembered, light and flaky with that indefinable something that made them extraordinary. Buttermilk. That had been the secret ingredient, buttermilk and a pinch of sugar. "These are wonderful," Ethan said, because the silence was becoming unbearable. "Best biscuits I've had in years." Eliza's hand stilled on her fork. She didn't look up, but color rose in her cheeks. It was the first real reaction he'd gotten from her, and something about that small show of emotion made her seem more human, less like a ghost who might disappear if he looked away. "Miss Eliza used to make them for—" Nora started, then caught herself again. "She makes them special, for special occasions." "Is today special?" Ethan asked. Nora considered this seriously. "We're not in the snow anymore, and we're not hungry, and nobody's yelling, so yes, today is special." Nobody's yelling. Such a simple statement, but it told him volumes about what their normal had been. They finished breakfast in a silence that was almost comfortable. Nora helped clear the dishes, and Eliza moved to wash them before Ethan could protest. He watched her work, watched the way her hands moved through the motions with automatic precision, and tried to reconcile this quiet, broken woman with the girl who danced with him under summer stars. "Storm's not letting up," he said eventually, looking out the window at the white wall beyond. "We're stuck here for a while. Could be days." Eliza's shoulders tensed, but she kept washing dishes. "That means you're safe," Ethan continued, keeping his voice even. "Whatever you're running from, it can't reach you here. Not until the snow clears. So you can rest." Both of you. You don't have to be afraid." Nora looked up at Eliza, clearly wanting to believe this. Eliza's hands paused in the dishwater, and for a long moment she stood perfectly still, as if testing the truth of his words against everything she knew about the world. Then slowly she nodded. Just once. But it felt like progress. The morning stretched into afternoon. The snow kept falling, steady and relentless, burying the world in white silence. Ethan tried to go about his normal routines, checking on the horses in the barn, splitting wood, maintaining the property, but his awareness kept returning to the two refugees in his house. Nora followed him everywhere, fascinated by everything. She wanted to meet the horses, wanted to know how to split wood, wanted to learn about ranching and animals and why snow fell and how fires worked. Her curiosity was boundless, as if she'd spent years in silence and was finally free to ask every question she'd been storing up. Eliza watched from windows, never straying far from the house, never letting Nora completely out of her sight. Even when the child was clearly safe, even when it was just Ethan and Nora feeding the horses together, Eliza's face would appear in the window, checking, monitoring, unable to relax. "She worries about me," Nora said, catching Ethan looking back at the house. "She thinks something bad might happen if she's not watching." "Has something bad happened before?" Nora's expression shuddered. "I'm not supposed to talk about before." "Okay." Ethan handed her a brush. "Want to help me groom Thunder?" The horse, a massive bay gelding, lowered his head obligingly, and Nora giggled as she stretched up to brush his nose. "He's so big." "Gentle, though. Won't hurt you." "Miss Eliza says the biggest things are often the gentlest. She says it's the small, mean things you have to watch out for." Ethan filed that away, another piece of the puzzle. "Miss Eliza sounds wise." "She is." Nora's brushstrokes were tentative but growing more confident. "She knows everything. She can read and write and do numbers. She taught me my letters, and she knows about plants and medicine and how to make things grow. She's the smartest person I know." "How long have you known her?" "Forever," Nora said simply. "She's always been there." Always. Which suggested Eliza had been with Nora since birth. Which meant, if his suspicions were correct, Eliza had raised their daughter alone for 4 years, never telling him, never asking for help. The anger that had been simmering in his chest flared hotter. Why? Why had she kept this from him? Why had she let him believe he had nothing, no one, when all this time he'd had a daughter growing up without him? But the anger cooled just as quickly when he remembered the fear in Eliza's eyes. The way she flinched, the way she watched for danger even in moments of safety. Whatever had happened to her, it had been bad enough to steal her voice and her trust. And maybe, probably, it had been bad enough that keeping Nora's existence secret had been survival, not choice. They returned to the house as afternoon faded toward evening. Eliza had been busy in their absence. The main room was cleaner than it had been in months, floors swept, surfaces dusted, windows wiped clear of grime. A pot of something savory simmered on the stove, filling the house with warmth and rich smell. "You didn't have to do all this," Ethan said. Eliza looked at him briefly, then away. She gestured toward the pot, then toward the table, her meaning clear. "It's ready. Sit." They ate together again, the three of them at a table meant for 8. Nora kept up her steady stream of observations and questions. Eliza ate slowly, methodically, and Ethan watched them both, cataloging similarities, looking for pieces of himself in this child who might be his. The mark on Nora's neck, the shape of her eyes, his mother's eyes, the stubborn set of her jaw when she concentrated, the way she tilted her head just like his father used to when listening to something interesting. How had he not seen it immediately? How had it taken him this long to recognize his own blood? "Because you weren't looking," a voice whispered in his mind. "Because you'd convinced yourself you'd never have this." After dinner, Nora grew quiet, her eyelids drooping despite her obvious efforts to stay awake. Eliza gathered the child in her arms and carried her to the bedroom, and Ethan was left alone with his thoughts and the dying fire. He'd just started to think they'd retired for the night when Eliza emerged again. She stood in the doorway, hesitant, wringing her hands. Then, with visible effort, she crossed the room and stopped in front of him. She was holding a piece of paper folded small. She held it out to him with trembling fingers. Ethan took it carefully, unfolding it to find neat handwriting, slightly cramped, as if written quickly. Thank you for your kindness. We will leave as soon as the snow clears. I'm sorry for the intrusion. He read it twice, then looked up at her. You're not an intrusion. Eliza's eyes met his, really met his, for the first time since that initial fleeting glance. There was so much in that look. Fear, yes, but also desperation and exhaustion and a question she couldn't bring herself to ask. And you don't have to leave, Ethan continued. Not until you're ready. Not until it's safe. Or, he took a breath, diving into deep water. Not at all. If you don't want to. Something flickered across her face. Hope, maybe. Or disbelief. Margaret, he said quietly, testing the name. She flinched as if struck, taking a step back. Her hand flew to her throat, and tears sprang to her eyes. It is you, Ethan said, standing slowly. You're her. You're Margaret. She shook her head frantically, backing away further. No, no, no. I know it's you. I recognized you. And Nora, he gestured toward the bedroom. She has the family mark, the same mark my father had, the same one I carry. She's mine, isn't she? She's my daughter. The tears spilled over, tracking down Eliza's cheeks. She pressed both hands over her mouth, as if to hold in sounds that wanted to escape. Her whole body was shaking. I'm not angry, Ethan said quickly, desperately. I'm not going to hurt you. I just need to know. I need to understand. Please, just nod or shake your head. Is Nora my daughter? For a long moment, Eliza stood frozen, tears streaming silently down her face. Then, so slowly it was almost imperceptible, she nodded. The confirmation hit Ethan like a physical force. He'd suspected, but suspicion and certainty were different animals. His legs felt weak. He sat back down heavily, staring at this woman who'd kept such a monumental secret. Why? The word came out hoarse. Why didn't you tell me? Why did you leave? Eliza fumbled for the paper he'd set down, turned it over and wrote quickly with a pencil she'd pulled from her pocket. Her handwriting was shakier now, but still legible. I had no choice. They made me go. Said you were beneath our family, said they'd make arrangements. I didn't know I was pregnant until after. They. Her family, then. The memory came back clearer now. Margaret mentioning parents who were particular about Station, who'd only let her attend the dance because her brother had insisted. Ethan had been a ranch hand back then, not an owner, not good enough for someone from a merchant family with pretensions of gentility. And after? Ethan asked. After Nora was born? You could have written, could have told me. More frantic writing. Married off to pay father's debts. No choice. He would have taken her, would have hurt her to control me. Couldn't risk it. Had to keep her secret. Had to keep her safe. Married off. The words made Ethan's blood run cold. She'd been sold, essentially, given to some man to settle accounts. And she'd hidden Nora's existence to protect her from whoever that man was. The bad man, Ethan said. The one Nora mentioned. That's your husband? Eliza nodded, fresh tears falling. And you ran. You brought her here because she was already writing. Because he found out. After 4 years, he found out she existed. Said she wasn't his. Said he'd have her declared a bastard. Worse things. I heard him planning, so we left. I remembered you were good. Hoped you'd help. Ethan's hands clenched into fists. What's his name? Eliza's eyes went wide with panic. She shook her head violently, grabbing the paperback and scribbling, No, don't. He's dangerous, connected. Please, just let us stay until spring, then we'll disappear. He'll never find us. I'm not letting you disappear, Ethan said firmly. Not again. Nora is my daughter. He stopped, not sure how to finish that sentence. What was she? The mother of his child. The girl he'd cared for one summer long ago. A stranger wearing a familiar face. All of those things, none of them, something he couldn't yet name. You're not running anymore, he said instead. Both of you are staying here, where you're safe, where you belong. Eliza was shaking her head again, writing frantically. You don't understand. He won't stop. He'll come. He'll take her. He'll hurt you. Then let him come. Ethan's voice was hard. This is my land, my home, and she's my daughter. If he wants to take her, he'll have to go through me first. Something shifted in Eliza's expression. The fear didn't leave, but something else joined it, something that looked almost like hope. She wrote one more line, hand trembling. Why would you do this? You don't know us anymore. Ethan held her gaze. Because 4 years ago, someone should have stood up for you, should have fought for you, should have stopped them from taking you away and selling you off like property. And nobody did. But I'm here now, and I'm not letting it happen again. The paper fell from Eliza's hands. She stood there, tears streaming down her face, her whole body shaking with silent sobs. And then, slowly, she sank to her knees, her hands covering her face, years of held-back grief pouring out in waves. Ethan moved without thinking, crossing the distance between them and kneeling beside her. He didn't touch her, didn't want to frighten her, but he stayed close, a presence, a promise. You're safe now, he said quietly. Both of you, I swear it. They stayed like that for a long time, Eliza crying silently while Ethan kept watch, both of them careful not to wake the child sleeping in the next room, the child who connected them. The daughter neither of them had planned, but both would protect with everything they had. Eventually, Eliza's tears slowed. She pulled back, wiping her face with shaking hands, not looking at him. The vulnerability of the moment seemed to embarrass her. She started to stand, but Ethan caught her wrist gently. One more thing, he said. What do I call you? Margaret? Eliza? She pulled her hand free and picked up the paper, writing one word. Eliza. Margaret died 4 years ago. Ethan nodded slowly. Eliza, then. She stood, smoothing down her skirt with trembling hands, still not meeting his eyes. Then she moved quickly back to the bedroom, closing the door behind her with a soft click. Ethan stayed on the floor for a moment longer, processing everything that had just happened. He had a daughter. He had a 4-year-old daughter named Nora, who made him laugh and asked impossible questions and had his family's mark on her neck. And he had Eliza, Margaret, who was no longer Margaret, damaged and silent and terrified, but here, actually here, in his house, after 7 years of absence. He stood slowly and returned to his chair by the fire. Sleep still felt impossible. Outside, the storm continued its assault, but Ethan barely noticed. His mind was racing ahead, planning, strategizing. Come spring, when the snow melted and the passes cleared, Eliza's husband would come looking. That was inevitable. Men like that, men who bought women to settle debts, men who threatened children, they didn't let go easily, didn't accept loss. But this was Montana. This was his land, his home. And Ethan had learned long ago how to defend what was his. Let him come, Ethan thought again, staring into the fire. Let him try to take them. He wouldn't succeed. Ethan would make sure of that. Dawn came again, gray and cold. Ethan woke stiff in his chair to find Nora sitting on the floor nearby, watching him with curious eyes. You didn't sleep in a bed, she observed. Wanted to keep the fire going, Ethan said, which was partially true. Miss Eliza says you're being kind to us. Nora's expression was solemn. Are you going to keep being kind, or will you change your mind like other people did? I'm not going to change my mind. How do you know? Because you're my daughter, Ethan said, taking the leap. And I don't abandon family. Nora tilted her head, considering this. Miss Eliza said you might be my papa. Is that true? Yes, that's true. Oh. Nora processed this for a moment. That's good. I always wanted a papa. Most kids have them, but I never did. Miss Eliza said mine had to go away, but that he would have stayed if he could have. Was that true? Yes, Ethan said, his throat tight. If I'd known about you, nothing could have kept me away. Nora nodded, satisfied. Can I call you Papa, then, instead of Mr. Cole? I'd like that very much. Okay, Papa. She tested the word, smiling. Then with the quick pivot of childhood, Are you going to make breakfast? I'm really hungry. Ethan laughed, actually laughed, and stood. Come on, then. Let's see what we can make. They cooked together, Nora chattering happily about the horses and the snow and all the things she wanted to learn. And when Eliza emerged from the bedroom, still wary but slightly less rigid, she found them laughing over burnt bacon and eggs cooked just right. She stopped in the doorway, watching them, and for just a moment the fear in her eyes was replaced by something else, something that looked like hope for a future she'd thought lost forever. And in that snow-buried ranch house, cut off from the world, three people who'd been broken by circumstances beyond their control began the slow, careful process of becoming whole. The days blurred together in a strange, suspended peace. The storm held them captive for nearly a week, the snow piling so high against the windows that the house felt like a cave carved from winter itself. But inside, something unexpected was happening, something that felt almost like healing. Nora bloomed in the warmth and safety. She laughed more each day, her questions growing bolder, her movements less cautious. She followed Ethan everywhere, mimicking his walk, his gestures, soaking up every scrap of attention like a flower turning toward sun it had never known existed. "Papa, why do horses sleep standing up? Papa, where does the smoke go when it leaves the chimney? Papa, if snow is just frozen rain, why doesn't rain freeze before it falls?" Each papa landed in Ethan's chest like a small miracle. He'd never imagined the weight a single word could carry, the way it could remake a man from the inside out. He found himself smiling at odd moments, caught off guard by joy he'd forgotten how to feel. Eliza remained more guarded, but even she was changing. Small shifts, barely noticeable at first. She started making eye contact for longer than a second. Her hand stopped shaking when she cooked. She moved through the house with slightly less fear, as if testing whether this safety was real or just another trap waiting to spring closed. She still didn't speak, but she wrote more freely now. Little notes left on the table in the morning. "Thank you for the firewood. Nora enjoyed the stories last night. The roof is leaking in the northeast corner." Ethan responded to each one, sometimes in writing, sometimes aloud, treating their strange hybrid conversation as if it were perfectly normal. And gradually, it became so. On the fourth day of their confinement, Nora discovered the trunk in the spare bedroom. Ethan heard her excited shriek and came running, finding her surrounded by his mother's old things, dresses, shawls, a hat box full of ribbons and lace. "Papa, look at all the beautiful things. Whose are they?" "They were my mother's," Ethan said, kneeling beside her. "She passed away when I was younger." Nora's face fell. "I'm sorry, that must have made you very sad." "It did. Still does sometimes. Miss Eliza says it's okay to be sad about people we loved. She says sadness means they mattered." Nora pulled out a blue shawl, holding it up to the light. "Was your mama pretty?" "Very pretty. And kind. She would have loved you." "Really?" Nora's eyes went wide. "How do you know?" "Because she always wanted a granddaughter. She told me so right before she died. Said she hoped I'd have a little girl someday who could wear her ribbons and learn her recipes and carry on all the things that made our family special." Nora clutched the shawl tighter. "I could do that. I could learn things. If you teach me." "I will," Ethan promised. "We'll both teach you. Me and Miss Eliza." At the mention of her name, they both turned to find Eliza standing in the doorway. She'd been watching, silent as always, but tears were streaming down her face. When Ethan met her eyes, she mouthed two words. "Thank you." That night, after Nora had fallen asleep wearing 3 of his mother's ribbons in her hair, Ethan and Eliza sat together by the fire for the first time. Not speaking, Eliza couldn't, and Ethan had learned the value of comfortable silence, just existing in the same space without fear. Eliza had brought her paper and pencil, though, and after a long while she began to write. When she finished, she handed the paper to Ethan. "I need to tell you what happened. You deserve to know, but it's hard to write, hard to remember." "You don't have to," Ethan said, "not if it hurts too much." She shook her head and took the paper back, writing more. "I do, because when he comes, and he will come, you need to know what you're facing." Ethan's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "All right, I'm listening." Eliza's hand moved across the page, slower now, each word seeming to cost her something. Ethan watched her face as she wrote, saw the way her expression closed off, how she retreated into some internal fortress to survive the telling. When she finally handed him the pages, 3 of them, covered in cramped writing, her hands were shaking again. Ethan read slowly, feeling his anger build with each line. Her father had owed money to a man named Cyrus Blackwood, a wealthy merchant from Silver Creek with connections to judges, lawmen, and half the territorial government. When the debt came due and couldn't be paid, Blackwood had offered an alternative: marriage to Margaret, the eldest daughter. 20 years old, educated, pretty enough to be shown off at social functions. Her father had agreed without asking her. The wedding happened within a month. He seemed kind at first, Eliza had written. Polite, proper. But that changed after the ceremony. He wanted a decoration, not a wife. Someone to dress up and show off and keep silent. When I spoke out of turn or expressed opinions he didn't like, he found ways to correct me. The corrections had started small: locked doors, missed meals, public humiliation. Then they'd escalated. Ethan's hands clenched the paper tighter as he read about the first time Blackwood had struck her, the first time he'd locked her in a room for days, the first time he'd threatened to do worse if she didn't learn her place. I learned to be silent, she'd written, learned that speaking only brought pain. Eventually, the silence became permanent. My voice just stopped working, like my body knew better than my mind what was safe. But through it all, she'd hidden Nora's existence, had claimed the child was an orphan she'd taken in out of charity. Blackwood had allowed it because it made him look magnanimous, and because children bored him. As long as the girl stayed out of sight and didn't cost too much to feed, he didn't care. For 4 years, it had worked. Nora grew up in servants' quarters, raised by Eliza in stolen moments, told to call her Miss Eliza instead of Mother, taught to be invisible. Then, 3 weeks ago, Blackwood had overheard Nora singing, a lullaby Eliza used to sing, back when she still had a voice, a lullaby her own mother had taught her, passed down through generations. Blackwood had recognized it, had done the math, had confronted Eliza with cold rage and colder certainty. He knew she wasn't his, Eliza had written, knew she had to be from before. He was going to have her declared illegitimate, was going to send her away to one of those places where unwanted children go, or worse. I heard him talking to his associates about it, planning. So that night, while he was in town on business, we ran. The pages ended there, but Ethan could fill in the rest. 3 days of walking through winter, 40 miles with a child, arriving half dead at his door because Eliza had remembered one kind summer and hoped that kindness might still exist. He set the pages down carefully, his hands trembling with suppressed rage. This man, Cyrus Blackwood, he hurt you. Eliza nodded, not meeting his eyes. For years, another nod, and now he's looking for you, for Nora. A third nod, and this time she did look at him, her eyes pleading for understanding. She grabbed the pencil and wrote quickly, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have brought this to your door, but I had nowhere else to go, no one else who might help. Don't apologize, Ethan said, his voice harder than he intended. You did the right thing. You got her away from him. You survived, and now you're here, and he can't hurt either of you anymore. Eliza's expression was doubtful, hopeless. She wrote, You don't know him. He has power. Money. Friends in every town from here to the capital. When the snow clears, he'll come, and he'll have the law on his side. The law says a man can beat his wife silent. The law says a wife is property. The law says he has rights to any child in his household. The law... She stopped writing, her hand cramping. When she continued, the words were barely legible. The law won't help us. Ethan stood, pacing to the window and back, his mind working through possibilities. She was right about the law. Montana Territory in 1886 didn't offer much protection to women, especially not against wealthy, connected men. If Blackwood showed up with the right paperwork, the right friends, he could take Nora legally, could have Eliza dragged back to Silver Creek in chains if he wanted, unless... You said he was going to have Nora declared illegitimate, Ethan said slowly. Was going to, but he didn't, not yet. Eliza shook her head. So legally, as far as any court knows, she's still considered his ward, the orphan you took in. A nod. Which means, Ethan continued, the plan forming as he spoke, we need to establish her real parentage before he can file anything. We need to claim her publicly. Put it on record that she's mine, not his, that she was never his to take. Eliza's eyes widened. She wrote frantically, that would expose everything, would make it a scandal. You'd be admitting to fathering a child out of wedlock. It would ruin your reputation. I don't care about my reputation, Ethan said. I care about keeping my daughter safe. And if claiming her publicly is what it takes, then that's what we'll do. But no buts. The minute this snow clears, we're going into town. We're filing the paperwork, birth certificate, affidavit of paternity, whatever it takes to make it legal and official. He met her eyes, his expression fierce. She's my daughter, mine. And no piece of paper from Cyrus Blackwood is going to change that. Eliza stared at him, tears spilling over again. She looked like she wanted to argue, to protest, to point out all the ways this could go wrong. But finally, she just nodded and wrote one more line. Thank you for fighting for her. I'm fighting for both of you, Ethan said quietly. Something passed between them then, in the firelight and silence. Not love. Not yet. Too much had happened. Too much time had passed. But understanding. Recognition. The beginning of something that might, given time and safety, grow into trust. The storm broke on the 7th day. Ethan woke to sunlight, actual sunlight, streaming through the windows, and the absence of wind for the first time in a week. When he stepped outside, the world was transformed. Snow lay 3 feet deep in places, sculpted into fantastic shapes by the wind, glittering under a sky so blue it hurt to look at. Nora squealed with delight when she saw it, immediately begging to go outside and play. Eliza bundled her up in layers of wool and flannel, and Ethan watched his daughter experience her first real snowfall with the joy of someone who'd never been allowed to be a child before. Papa, I can make angels, look! She flopped backward into a drift, waving her arms and legs. I see. That's a good one. Miss Eliza, come make one too. Eliza hesitated on the porch, wrapped in his mother's old cloak. Ethan caught her eye and nodded toward the snow. Go on. When's the last time you played? She looked at him for a long moment, something shifting in her expression. Then, carefully, she stepped down off the porch and into the deep snow. She made her way to where Nora was already constructing a second angel, and after another moment's hesitation, she lay down in the snow beside her daughter. Ethan watched them make snow angels together, mother and daughter, their laughter. Nora's voiced, Eliza's silent but visible in the shaking of her shoulders, rising into the clear air. And for just a moment, he let himself imagine a future where this was normal, where they were a family, where the past stayed buried and the future held nothing but bright, clear days. But the peace lasted only 3 more days. Ethan was in the barn, mucking stalls, while Nora helped by talking to the horses when he heard it. The sound of hoofbeats, multiple riders, coming up the road from town. His blood went cold. He dropped the pitchfork and moved to the barn door, his hand automatically reaching for the rifle he'd started keeping close. 4 riders crested the hill. They were still too far away to identify, but Ethan could see they were dressed well, riding good horses. Not neighbors. Not anyone who belonged out here in the middle of winter. Nora, he said quietly, go to the house. Get Miss Eliza. Tell her we have visitors. Tell her to stay inside and lock the door. Something in his tone made Nora's smile vanish. Is it the bad man? I don't know yet, but I need you inside. Now, go. She went, running through the snow without argument. Ethan watched until she reached the house and disappeared inside, then turned his attention back to the riders. They were closer now. He could make out details. 3 men and a woman, all dressed in city clothes ill-suited for the backcountry. The lead rider was a man in his 40s, well-fed, with the kind of confidence that came from never being told no. He sat his horse like someone who'd hired people to teach him how, technically correct but fundamentally uncomfortable. Cyrus Blackwood. Ethan knew it without being told. The riders pulled up in front of the house. Blackwood's eyes swept over the property with barely concealed disdain, taking in the weathered barn, the simple ranch house, the raw frontier reality of it all. This is the place? He said to the woman beside him. She was older, severe-looking, with a face like winter itself. According to the innkeeper, yes, sir, Ethan Cole's property, only ranch house for miles. Blackwood dismounted with the careful movements of someone unfamiliar with horses. The other 2 men, hired muscle by the look of them, followed suit. Ethan stepped out of the barn, rifle held casually across his chest. Not pointed at anyone. Not yet. But visible. Help you, gentlemen? Blackwood turned to face him, his expression cool and appraising. Mr. Cole, I presume. I'm Cyrus Blackwood from Silver Creek. I believe you have something that belongs to me. Don't have anything that belongs to anyone but myself, Ethan said evenly. You must be mistaken. I don't think so. Blackwood's smile didn't reach his eyes. My wife and ward have been missing for nearly 2 weeks. I have it on good authority. They took refuge here during the recent storm. I've come to collect them and bring them home. Your wife. Ethan let the words hang in the air. You mean the woman you beat silent? The one you terrorized for 4 years? Blackwood's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Anger, quickly controlled. I don't know what lies she's told you, but I assure you my wife is unwell, prone to flights of fancy and hysteria. She requires careful management. That what you call it? Management? Mr. Cole. Blackwood's voice hardened. I'm trying to be civilized about this. My wife is my legal property. The child is my legal ward. Whatever story they've told you, whatever sympathy they've generated, it doesn't change the law. They need to come home with me. Now. No. The word dropped between them like a stone. Blackwood's men shifted, hands moving toward weapons. Ethan's grip on his rifle tightened imperceptibly. I beg your pardon, Blackwood said, his voice dangerously soft. I said no. They're not going anywhere with you. Mr. Cole, I don't think you understand the situation. I understand perfectly. Ethan took a step forward. You married a woman to settle a debt. You spent 4 years breaking her down, hurting her, stealing her voice. And when you discovered she had a daughter, my daughter, you decided to punish them both by threatening to take the child away. So they ran. And they came here. Where they're safe. Where they're staying. Blackwood's composure cracked. Your daughter? That's a convenient fiction. The child is mine, Ethan interrupted. Born 5 years ago to Margaret Whitmore, before you ever touched her. She has my family's mark, my blood, and I have every intention of filing legal claim to her the moment the courthouse opens. A bastard child has no legal standing. She's not a bastard if I claim her, and I do, publicly, in front of witnesses. Ethan looked pointedly at the men and woman Blackwood had brought. 4 witnesses, in fact. Blackwood's face flushed red. This is absurd. You can't just... I can. I am. And if you try to take them, if you so much as step toward that house, I'll drop you where you stand. The rifle, still held casually, shifted slightly, just enough to make the threat explicit. Blackwood's men tensed, but before anyone could draw a weapon, the house door opened. Eliza stood in the doorway, Nora behind her. Even from a distance, Ethan could see how pale she was, how her hands gripped the doorframe for support. Eliza! Blackwood's voice changed, becoming almost gentle, cajoling. Darling, come now. This has gone on long enough. You've had your little rebellion, but it's time to come home. Bring the child. We'll forget all this unpleasantness. Eliza didn't move, didn't make a sound. Eliza, Blackwood said again, harder now. You're making a scene. You know how I dislike scenes. Still nothing. If you don't come out here right now, there will be consequences. Do you understand me? Consequences. Nora pushed past Eliza, her small face fierce. Don't talk to her like that. You're mean and she doesn't have to listen to you anymore. Blackwood's expression went cold. Child, you will be silent. Your betters are speaking. My papa says I can talk whenever I want. And he says we don't have to go with you. And he says, your papa? Blackwood's laugh was ugly. That man is not your father, you stupid child. You have no father. You're nobody. A mistake. An embarrassment your mother tried to hide from decent society. That's enough, Ethan said, his voice like iron. You need to leave. Now. I'm not leaving without... Yes, you are. Ethan raised the rifle, pointing it directly at Blackwood's chest. You're going to get back on your horse. You're going to ride back to Silver Creek, and you're going to stay there. Because if you come back, if you try to take them, if you even think about filing legal action against them, I will make sure everyone in Montana Territory knows exactly what kind of man you are. You wouldn't dare. Try me. Ethan's eyes were cold. I'll tell every newspaper, every judge, every person who'll listen about how you beat a woman silent, how you terrorized a child, how you bought a wife like livestock and treated her worse. You want to talk about scandals, about reputations. Let's see how your business connections hold up when everyone knows what you really are. Blackwood's face went white, then red, then white again. You have no proof. I have her. I have 4 years of scars and trauma and silence that speaks louder than any words. And I have a daughter who can describe exactly what she saw and heard in your house. Ethan's voice was steady, implacable. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to leave. Eliza is going to file for legal separation on grounds of cruelty, and Nora is going to be declared my legitimate daughter through a paternity claim. Any attempt to contest it, and I start talking, loudly, to everyone who will listen. The standoff stretched. Blackwood's men looked uncertain, clearly not having signed up for a fight that might turn deadly. The woman who'd come with them had already backed toward her horse. Finally, Blackwood spoke, his voice shaking with suppressed rage. This isn't over. Yes, Ethan said quietly. It is. For a long moment, Blackwood stared at him with pure hatred. Then he turned, climbing back onto his horse with jerky, furious movements. His men followed quickly, clearly relieved to be leaving. You'll regret this, Blackwood said from his saddle. Both of you. I have friends, connections. You think you can hide out here in the wilderness, but goodbye, Blackwood. The dismissal was absolute. Blackwood's jaw worked, words clearly wanting to spill out, threats and promises and rage. But he must have seen something in Ethan's face that gave him pause. Must have realized that this isolated rancher, this nobody from nowhere, was absolutely serious about pulling that trigger. He wheeled his horse around and spurred it forward, his entourage scrambling to follow. They thundered back down the road, kicking up clouds of snow, and within minutes they disappeared over the hill. Ethan held his position for several minutes more, making sure they were truly gone. Only when he was certain did he lower the rifle and turn toward the house. Eliza had collapsed against the doorframe, her face buried in her hands, her whole body shaking. Nora clung to her, looking frightened and confused. Ethan crossed to them quickly, gently guiding them back inside and closing the door. He set the rifle aside and knelt in front of Eliza. He's gone. You're safe. I promise. Eliza looked up at him, tears streaming down her face, and this time she didn't try to hide them. She reached out with trembling hands and pulled him into a fierce embrace, silent sobs racking her body. Ethan held her carefully, letting her cry, one hand stroking her back while the other reached out to pull Nora close. They stayed like that, the three of them huddled together in the doorway, while outside the winter sun shone bright and indifferent on the snow. He'll come back, Eliza finally wrote, after she'd cried herself out. He won't give up. Let him try, Ethan said. Next time, we'll be ready. And next time, we'll have the law on our side. You really meant it? About claiming Nora? About the legal separation? Every word. But the scandal, I don't care. Ethan met her eyes. I don't care what anyone thinks. I don't care about gossip or reputation or propriety. I care about keeping you both safe. That's all that matters. Eliza stared at him, something shifting in her expression. The fear was still there, probably would be for a long time. But beneath it, something new was growing, something that looked like trust. She picked up her pencil and wrote slowly, carefully. Why? Why would you do this? Risk everything for us? Ethan looked at Nora, who was watching him with those serious, too old eyes, then back at Eliza. Because 7 years ago, I let you go without a fight. I didn't know you needed saving, didn't know you'd been taken against your will, but I let you disappear from my life, and I've regretted it every day since. He took a breath. I won't make that mistake again. You're here now, both of you, and I'm not letting anyone take you away. Not Blackwood, not the law, not anyone. Eliza's tears started again, but this time they were different, softer. She wrote one more line. You're a good man, Ethan Cole. I'm trying to be, he said quietly. For both of you, I'm trying. That night, after Nora had fallen asleep, Ethan and Eliza made their plans. Come morning, they would ride to the nearest town, a day's journey, and file the necessary paperwork. Paternity claim for Nora, legal separation for Eliza, restraining order against Blackwood. It wouldn't be easy. There would be questions, judgment, scandal, but they would face it together. and for the first time since she'd appeared on his doorstep, Eliza smiled. Just a small one, barely visible in the firelight. But it was there, a promise of better days ahead, a belief that maybe, just maybe, they could build something from the wreckage of their pasts. Outside, the winter night was cold and clear. Inside, three broken people held onto each other and hoped for spring. They left for town before dawn, the horse's breath creating clouds in the frozen air. Ethan had debated leaving Nora behind with Samuel Pritchard, his elderly neighbor, but Eliza had written a firm response. She stays with us, always. So Nora rode tucked in front of Ethan on Thunder, wrapped in so many layers she looked like a small animated bundle of wool, while Eliza followed on the gentler mare, sitting side saddle in his mother's old riding dress. The journey took most of the day, the horses picking their way carefully through snow-packed trails. Nora chattered for the first hour, asking questions about everything they passed, but eventually the cold and the rhythm of the horse lulled her into drowsy silence. She leaned back against Ethan's chest, small and trusting, and something in him shifted permanently. This was his child, his daughter. The reality of it settled into his bones like an oath. They reached Millerton just as afternoon was fading into evening. The town was larger than Silver Creek, but still small by any real standard. 24 buildings clustered around a main street, a courthouse that doubled as a general meeting hall, a handful of shops, 2 saloons, and a church with a steeple that needed repair. People on the street turned to stare as they rode past, their eyes curious and assessing. Strangers were always noteworthy in places like this, and the sight of a man with a woman and child was the kind of thing that would fuel gossip for weeks. Ethan guided them to the small boarding house run by Mrs. Henderson, a widow who asked no questions as long as the money was good. He paid for 2 rooms, one for Eliza and Nora, one for himself, and carried their meager belongings upstairs while Eliza got Nora settled. "Papa," Nora whispered, her eyes wide as she looked around the unfamiliar room. "Are we safe here?" "Safe as anywhere," Ethan said, "and I'm right next door. If you need anything, anything at all, you call for me. Understand?" She nodded solemnly, and he left them to rest, though his own room held no appeal. He was too restless, too aware of what tomorrow would bring. The courthouse opened at 8. By noon, their entire situation would be a matter of public record. There would be no taking it back, no undoing what they were about to set in motion. He spent the evening in the boarding house's small sitting room, nursing coffee and ignoring the curious looks from other guests. Around 9, Eliza appeared in the doorway. She'd put Nora to bed and changed into the simple gray dress she'd been wearing when she first arrived. The blue wool dress too fine for town, likely to raise questions about where a ranch hand's woman had gotten such quality fabric. She crossed to him, moving with that careful quietness that was becoming familiar, and held out a piece of paper. Ethan took it, tilting it toward the lamplight. "I'm frightened. What if they don't believe us? What if they side with him?" "Then we'll find another way," Ethan said. "But we have truth on our side. That counts for something." Eliza's expression was doubtful. She wrote more. "Truth doesn't always win, not against money and power." "Maybe not," Ethan admitted, "but we're not backing down. Whatever happens tomorrow, we face it together." She studied his face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. She wrote one more line before leaving. "Thank you for being brave enough for both of us." Sleep came in fragments that night. Ethan drifted in and out of consciousness, his mind churning through possibilities, preparing arguments, imagining confrontations. When gray dawn finally crept through his window, he was already dressed and ready. The courthouse was a stolid brick building that seemed designed to intimidate. Ethan pushed through the heavy doors with Eliza and Nora close behind, their footsteps echoing in the high-ceilinged entry hall. A clerk sat at a desk near the back, a thin man with spectacles and the tired expression of someone who'd heard every human problem imaginable. "Help you?" he asked, barely looking up from his ledger. "Need to file some papers," Ethan said. "Paternity claim and petition for legal separation." That got the clerk's attention. His eyes lifted, taking in the 3 of them with sudden interest. "Paternity claim, you say? And separation? Those are unusual requests to file together." "It's an unusual situation." "I see." The clerk pulled out forms, spreading them across his desk. "Names." Ethan Cole. And this is Eliza Moore, formerly Margaret Whitmore, currently married to Cyrus Blackwood of Silver Creek. The child is Nora, born in Silver Creek 5 years ago. The clerk's pen paused. Blackwood? The merchant Blackwood? That's right. And you're claiming paternity of his wife's child? She's not his wife by choice, and the child was never his. Nora was conceived before Mrs. Blackwood was forced into that marriage. She's mine, and I'm claiming her legally. The clerk set down his pen, leaning back in his chair with obvious fascination. Mr. Cole, do you understand what you're alleging here? This is going to require testimony, evidence. Mr. Blackwood is a respected businessman with considerable influence. If you're making false claims, they're not false. Ethan's voice was steady. Every word is truth, and I'm prepared to swear to it in front of a judge. Then you'll get your chance. Judge Morrison handles domestic cases. He's in session now, actually, if you want to file immediately. Though I should warn you, Mr. Blackwood has filed claims of his own. The clerk pulled out another set of papers. Came in 3 days ago. Petition to have his wife declared mentally incompetent and his ward returned to his custody by force if necessary. Claims she's unstable, possibly dangerous to the child. Eliza went rigid beside Ethan. Her hand found Nora's and gripped it tight. That's a lie, Ethan said flatly. She's protecting the child from him. Well, you'll need to convince Judge Morrison of that. He's not inclined to take the side of wives against husbands, especially not when the husband has the kind of standing Mr. Blackwood does. The clerk's expression softened slightly. I'll be honest with you, Mr. Cole. You're fighting an uphill battle. The law favors men like Blackwood. Money talks, if you understand me. I understand. Ethan met his eyes. But we're filing anyway. Today. Now. The clerk sighed and picked up his pen again. Your funeral. Let's get the paperwork started. It took 2 hours to complete all the forms, 2 hours of questions, signatures, sworn statements. Eliza couldn't speak her testimony, so she wrote it out in painful detail. Her forced marriage, the years of abuse, her reasons for fleeing. Ethan provided his own affidavit claiming Nora as his biological daughter and requesting legal recognition of paternity. They included the evidence of the family birthmark, witnesses who could testify to seeing Margaret and Ethan together 7 years ago, anything that might support their case. By the time they finished, it was nearly noon. The clerk gathered all the papers and stood. Judge Morrison can see you now, but Mr. Cole, he's already heard Mr. Blackwood's side. This won't be easy. Nothing worth doing ever is, Ethan said. The courtroom was smaller than he'd expected, more like a large office than the grand halls of justice from newspaper illustrations. Judge Morrison sat behind a scarred wooden desk, a man in his 60s with iron gray hair and the weathered face of someone who'd spent most of his life outdoors before taking up the law. He looked up as they entered, his expression neutral, but his eyes sharp. Mr. Cole, Mrs. Blackwood, have a seat. They settled into chairs facing the desk, Nora between them. The child was silent now, sensing the gravity of the moment, her small hand still clasped in Eliza's. Judge Morrison spread their papers across his desk, reading quickly, his expression giving nothing away. Finally, he looked up. This is quite a story you're telling here. You're claiming that Mrs. Blackwood's daughter is actually your biological child, conceived before her marriage to Cyrus Blackwood? Yes, sir. And you're asking me to grant legal paternity, which would effectively remove the child from Mr. Blackwood's household and custody? Yes, sir. While simultaneously petitioning for Mrs. Blackwood to be granted a legal separation from her husband on grounds of cruelty. That's correct. Judge Morrison leaned back in his chair, studying them. I've known Cyrus Blackwood for 15 years. He's a prominent citizen, a successful businessman, a member of the territorial legislature. His reputation is without blemish. Ethan felt Eliza tense beside him. He kept his voice level. His reputation is a lie, Your Honor. What happens in his house, behind closed doors, is a different story. So you say, but I have Mr. Blackwood's testimony in front of me as well. He claims his wife is mentally unstable, that she's taken an orphan child he generously allowed her to foster and is now using the child as a pawn in some delusional fantasy. He says she's run away before, that she requires supervision and care, and that her accusations are the product of a disturbed mind. He's lying, Ethan said. Perhaps. Or perhaps you're lying, Mr. Cole. Perhaps you've been taken in by a troubled woman's fiction. Perhaps you're attempting to steal another man's property, because that's what a wife is, under the law. Property. She's not property. She's a human being who was sold to pay her father's debts and then tortured for years by the man who bought her. Judge Morrison's expression hardened. Strong words. Can you prove them? Look at her, Ethan said, gesturing to Eliza. She can't speak. Her voice was taken by years of abuse. Her hands shake when strangers approach. She flinches at sudden movements. Those aren't the behaviors of a woman in a loving marriage. They're also consistent with mental instability, which is Mr. Blackwood's claim. The judge turned his attention to Eliza. Mrs. Blackwood, can you speak at all? Even a word? Eliza's face paled. She opened her mouth, clearly trying, but no sound came out. After a moment, she closed it again, shame coloring her cheeks, and reached for her paper and pencil. She communicates by writing, Ethan said. She's fully competent, fully aware. She just can't make sound. That's convenient, Judge Morrison said dryly. Makes it difficult to cross-examine her, doesn't it? Eliza's hand moved rapidly across the paper. She held it up. I am not insane. I am not incompetent. I was abused. I ran to protect my daughter. Please believe me. Judge Morrison read it, his expression unreadable. Your daughter? You're stating for the record that this child is biologically yours, not an orphan you fostered? Eliza nodded emphatically, writing more. She is mine, born 5 years ago. Father is Ethan Cole. Hidden from my husband because he would have hurt her. And the evidence for this claim? Ethan spoke up. The child has a birthmark identical to one carried by my father and grandfather. It's a family trait, passed through blood. She has my eyes, my mother's features. Anyone who looks at us together can see the resemblance. Physical resemblance is not proof of paternity, Judge Morrison said. It's suggestive, but not conclusive. Do you have anything else? Witnesses to the birth? Documents? The birth was hidden, Ethan said. Eliza was already married by then, already trapped. She couldn't let anyone know the child wasn't her husband's, or there would have been consequences, for both of them. So you have no concrete proof. Just your word, her written statements, and a birthmark that could be coincidence. Judge Morrison shook his head. Mr. Cole, I want to believe you, but the law requires evidence, not emotion. And right now what I have is a respected businessman claiming his wife has stolen a child and run away with a man she barely knows, versus that man's unsubstantiated claims of abuse and paternity. What about what she wants? Ethan demanded. Doesn't her choice matter? Her choice? The judge's eyebrows rose. Mr. Cole, wives don't get choices. They're under the protection and authority of their husbands. That's the law. If I grant this separation without clear evidence of grievous harm, I'm setting a precedent that any wife can simply leave her husband whenever she pleases. That way lies chaos. That way lies freedom, Ethan shot back. Freedom for women who are trapped in situations they never chose, married to men who hurt them, living in fear every day of their lives. That's a pretty speech, Mr. Cole, but it's not the law. Judge Morrison gathered the papers, straightening them into a neat stack. I'm going to need time to review all of this. Come back tomorrow morning. I'll have made my decision by then. Tomorrow? Ethan's heart sank. Your Honor, every day we delay is another day Blackwood has to... To what? He's filed legal claims through proper channels. He's not breaking any laws. You, on the other hand, are currently harboring another man's wife against her husband's wishes. That's a crime in some jurisdictions. She came to me willingly. She was running for her life. So she claims, so you claim. But I've only heard one side of this story in person. Before I make any ruling, I want to hear from Mr. Blackwood directly. Judge Morrison's voice was firm. He's been summoned. Should arrive sometime late tonight or tomorrow morning. Once he's here, we'll have a full hearing, both parties present, and I'll make my determination. Ethan's blood ran cold. You brought him here? He has a right to defend himself against these accusations, Mr. Cole. Surely you understand that. What I understand is you've just put them in danger. Ethan stood, his chair scraping loudly. He's not going to come here to talk reasonably. He's going to come to take them back by force if necessary. Then it's a good thing we'll be having this discussion in a court of law, with a judge present. Morrison's voice was ice. Sit down, Mr. Cole, and control yourself or I'll hold you in contempt. Ethan sat slowly, every muscle tense. Beside him, Eliza had gone white as snow, her hands trembling so badly she could barely hold her pencil. She wrote shakily, "He's coming. He'll take her." "No, he won't," Ethan said quietly, though his heart was hammering. "I won't let him." "Mr. Cole," Judge Morrison said, his tone carrying a warning, "I strongly suggest you don't do anything foolish. The law will handle this. Let it." "The law hasn't protected her so far," Ethan said. "Why should I trust it to start now?" "Because the alternative is violence, and violence will only hurt your case. If you care about this woman and child, you'll let the process work." The judge stood, signaling the meeting was over. "Tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock. Both parties present. We'll settle this properly." They left the courthouse in numb silence. On the street, Ethan finally spoke. "We need to leave, now, before he gets here." Eliza shook her head frantically, writing, "Where would we go? He'll find us. He always finds me." "Then we make a stand, but not here. Not in town where he has the advantage." Ethan's mind was racing, calculating. "We go back to the ranch. We fortify. We wait for him there, on our terms." The judge said, "I don't care what the judge said. He just put you on a platter for Blackwood. We're not waiting around to be served up." Ethan looked down at Nora, who was watching with frightened eyes. "Trust me. Please." Eliza looked at her daughter, then back at Ethan. After a long moment, she nodded. They collected their things from the boarding house and rode out within the hour, pushing the horses hard despite the cold and growing darkness. Better to travel through the night than to be caught sleeping when Blackwood arrived. They reached the ranch just before midnight, the horses exhausted, Nora asleep in Ethan's arms. He carried her inside while Eliza tended to the horses, moving with the automatic efficiency of someone who'd learned to function through fear. Once Nora was settled in bed, they sat at the kitchen table and made their plans. Ethan pulled out his father's old hunting rifle, checking the action, counting ammunition. He had enough to hold off a small army if necessary, though he prayed it wouldn't come to that. "He'll bring men," Eliza wrote. "He always has men, and they'll be armed. So am I. You can't fight them all alone." "I can try." Ethan met her eyes. "I'm not letting him take you, either of you, whatever it takes." Eliza stared at him, tears sliding down her face. She wrote shakily, "Why? Why are you doing this? You barely know us anymore. We're not worth dying for." "Yes," Ethan said simply, "you are." She broke then, burying her face in her hands, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Ethan moved around the table and pulled her into his arms, holding her while she cried. And for the first time, she didn't stiffen or pull away. She just leaned into him, letting someone else carry the weight for a moment. "We'll get through this," Ethan promised. "Together. I swear it." They stayed up through the night, taking turns keeping watch. Ethan dozed in his chair by the fire while Eliza sat at the window, staring out at the moonlit snow. Every hour they traded places, neither willing to leave the house completely unguarded. Dawn came gray and threatening, clouds rolling in from the west promising more snow. Ethan was outside checking the horses when he heard it, the sound of multiple riders approaching fast. He grabbed his rifle and ran back to the house. "Eliza, get Nora and go to the cellar. Don't come out until I tell you it's safe." For once, she didn't argue. She grabbed Nora, just waking, confused and frightened, and disappeared through the trapdoor in the kitchen floor. Ethan closed it behind them, throwing the rug over it to hide its location. Then he took up position by the window and waited. 7 riders this time. Blackwood in the lead again, but flanked by 6 men who looked far more dangerous than the hired muscle from before. These were professionals, hired guns, men who did this kind of work for a living. They stopped in front of the house, fanning out in a loose semicircle. Blackwood dismounted, his expression cold and certain. "Cole," he shouted, I know you're in there. Send out my wife and the child, and we can end this peacefully." Ethan opened the door, but stayed inside, rifle visible. They're not yours to take. The judge disagrees. I have a court order here. Blackwood held up a paper. Issued this morning by Judge Morrison. Temporary custody of the child to me pending a full hearing, and a warrant for my wife's return on grounds of mental incompetence. That's a lie. The judge said tomorrow. Said both parties present. Plans changed. Blackwood's smile was cold. The judge reviewed the evidence overnight and made his determination. You lose, Cole. Now send them out. Show me the paper. I don't have to show you anything. Now stop wasting my time and Ethan fired a shot into the dirt at Blackwood's feet. The man jumped back with a curse, his hired guns drawing weapons instantly. I said, show me the paper, Ethan repeated. You ride close enough for me to read it? No tricks, or the next shot goes higher. A long, tense moment. Then Blackwood gestured to one of his men, who cautiously approached the porch and held up the document. Ethan scanned it quickly. It looked official, bore Judge Morrison's seal and signature. But something was wrong. The ink was too fresh, the paper too clean. This had been written in the last few hours, not overnight. This is a forgery, Ethan said. It's a legal document. It's a forgery, and you know it. Judge Morrison isn't even awake yet, and you're already waving around court orders? You had this made up somewhere in the night, probably paid some corrupt clerk to forge the seal. Ethan's voice was hard. Get off my property. You're making a mistake, Cole. I have 6 men here. You're alone. This doesn't end well for you. Maybe not, but it doesn't end well for you either. I'm a good shot. I'll take at least 3 of you before you bring me down. Want to guess if you will be one of them? Blackwood's certainty faltered. This is insane. This is protecting my family. Now leave. They're not your family. She's my wife. The child is my ward. The child is my daughter, Ethan shouted. My blood, my bone, my responsibility. And that woman suffered 4 years under your roof, 4 years of being beaten and broken and silenced. That ends now. She's free. She's safe. And you're leaving. You can't win this. Even if you drive me off now, I'll be back. With more men. With the real law. You think one rancher with a rifle can stand against the entire territorial government? I have friends, Cole. Real friends. Judges, marshals, legislators. They'll crush you. Then let them come. Ethan's voice was steady. Let them all come, because I'm not backing down. This is my land. This is my family. And any man who tries to take them will have to kill me first. Silence fell, broken only by the wind and the nervous shifting of horses. Blackwood's men looked uncertain, clearly reconsidering their employment. This was supposed to be simple. Ride out, intimidate a lone rancher, take what their boss claimed. But the man staring them down from that porch didn't look intimidated. He looked ready to die fighting. You're a fool, Blackwood finally said. An absolute fool. Maybe, Ethan said, but I'm a fool with a rifle and nothing left to lose. So I'll ask one more time. Get off my property. Blackwood stared at him for a long moment, hatred radiating from every line of his body. Then he turned to his men. We're leaving. Boss? Oh, one of them said uncertainly. I said we're leaving, but mark my words, Cole, this isn't over, not by a long shot. I'll be back. With the real law. And when I am, no amount of shooting is going to save you. They mounted up and rode out, slower this time, Blackwood looking back once with an expression that promised vengeance. Ethan kept his rifle trained on them until they disappeared over the hill, then sagged against the doorframe, adrenaline leaving him shaky. He crossed to the cellar and opened the trap door. They're gone. For now. Eliza climbed out, Nora in her arms, both of them pale but unharmed. She set Nora down and immediately grabbed her paper, writing frantically. He'll be back. He meant it. He'll bring more men, real legal authority. What do we do? Ethan took the paper from her and wrote his own response. We go back to town, today. We find Judge Morrison and make him hear the truth. And if that doesn't work, we find a lawyer, someone who can fight Blackwood on his own terms. We don't have money for lawyers. Then we'll find another way. Ethan met her eyes. But we don't run. Not anymore. We fight. Together. Eliza looked at him for a long moment, something shifting in her expression. Then she nodded. Once. Firm. A decision made. They would fight. And whatever came next, they would face it standing. They rode back into Millerton 3 hours later, this time with purpose hardening every movement. Ethan had sent word ahead through Samuel Pritchard, asking the old rancher to gather anyone who'd known Margaret Whitmore before her marriage, anyone who could testify to seeing her with Ethan that summer 7 years ago, anyone who might speak against Blackwood's character. Judge Morrison was in his office when they arrived, and his expression darkened the moment he saw them. "Mr. Cole, I was about to issue a warrant for your arrest. Mr. Blackwood came to me this morning claiming you'd threatened him at gunpoint. He came to my property with forged documents and 6 hired guns," Ethan said evenly. "I defended my home." "Forged documents?" The judge's eyebrows rose. "That's a serious accusation." "And a true one." Ethan pulled the paper from his pocket and laid it on the desk. "This is what Blackwood tried to use. Claims to be a court order signed by you, issued overnight. But look at the date. The timestamp. You couldn't have reviewed anything and made a decision that fast. He had someone forge this, probably before he even left Silver Creek." Judge Morrison examined the document carefully, his expression growing darker with each second. "This isn't my signature. It's close, but it's not mine. The seal is wrong too. See how the ink bled here? My seal doesn't do that." He looked up at Ethan with new respect. "You're right. This is a forgery, a damn good one, but a forgery nonetheless." "So Blackwood tried to use false legal authority to abduct my daughter and his wife," Ethan said. "That should tell you something about his character." "It tells me he's desperate, and desperate men are dangerous." Judge Morrison set the paper aside. "But it also tells me there's more to this story than he's let on. A man doesn't forge court documents if he's confident in his legal standing." "Your Honor, if I may," a new voice spoke from the doorway. Ethan turned to see a young man in a lawyer's suit, clean-shaven, with intelligent eyes. "My name is Thomas Brennan. I'm an attorney from Helena, and I've been following this case with interest." "Nobody invited you to this discussion, Mr. Brennan," Judge Morrison said. "Perhaps not, but I believe I have information relevant to your decision." Brennan stepped into the room, carrying a leather satchel. "I represent several women in Silver Creek who have, shall we say, concerns about Mr. Blackwood's treatment of his wife. They've asked me to offer testimony on Mrs. Blackwood's behalf." "Several women?" Ethan glanced at Eliza, who looked equally surprised. "Who?" "Neighbors, household staff who've worked for the Blackwoods. Women who've seen things they couldn't speak about publicly without risking their own safety." Brennan pulled documents from his satchel. "I have sworn affidavits here from 3 witnesses who observed bruises on Mrs. Blackwood, heard her crying behind locked doors, saw her being denied food and medical care. One witness, a former housekeeper, was fired after she asked why Mrs. Blackwood couldn't speak anymore. She was told it was none of her concern and that asking questions about the master's wife was grounds for dismissal without reference." Judge Morrison took the documents, reading with a frown that deepened with each page. "Why am I only seeing these now?" "Because until yesterday, these women had no reason to believe speaking out would matter. Cyrus Blackwood is powerful in Silver Creek. He owns property, holds debt on half the businesses in town, sits on the city council. Speaking against him could cost someone their livelihood, their home, their future." Brennan's voice was steady. "But when word spread that Mrs. Blackwood had finally escaped and was fighting for her freedom, these women found their courage. They want the court to know the truth." Liza's hands were shaking as she pulled out her paper and wrote quickly, "I didn't know anyone saw. I thought I was alone." "You were never alone," Brennan said gently. "You were just isolated. There's a difference." "This changes things," Judge Morrison admitted. "Multiple witnesses corroborating abuse puts Mr. Blackwood's character in serious question, but it still doesn't resolve the issue of paternity. Mr. Cole, do you have any additional evidence that the child is yours?" Before Ethan could answer, Samuel Pritchard pushed into the room, breathing hard. "Your Honor, sorry for the interruption, but I've got 5 people outside ready to testify they saw Ethan Cole and Margaret Whitmore together 7 years ago, including the pastor who ran the summer dance where they met, and Margaret's own brother, who's willing to speak against his sister's marriage." "Her brother?" Eliza stood up so fast her chair fell backward. She grabbed her paper, writing frantically. "James? James is here." "Right outside, ma'am," Samuel said. "Been waiting for years to make this right, from what he tells it." Judge Morrison looked overwhelmed. "Bring them in," All of them. If we're doing this, we're doing it properly. The next hour was a parade of testimony. The pastor, elderly now but sharp-minded, remembered Margaret Whitmore and Ethan Cole dancing together at the summer social, remembered how they'd looked at each other with the kind of intensity that made old romantics smile. Two neighbors testified they'd seen the couple walking together by the creek, talking quietly, clearly in love. A shopkeeper remembered Margaret buying ribbon for a dress she'd said was for someone special. And then James Whitmore stepped forward, and Eliza's tears started flowing before he even spoke. He was younger than Ethan expected, maybe 25 now, with the same dark eyes as his sister. He nodded respectfully to the judge, then turned to Eliza with an expression of deep regret. "Your Honor, I need to say something I should have said 7 years ago. My father forced Margaret into marriage with Cyrus Blackwood to pay his gambling debts. She begged us not to make her go. She told us she was in love with someone else, that she wanted to marry Ethan Cole. But father wouldn't hear it. Said Cole was beneath us, that Blackwood's money was more important than her happiness." James's voice shook with emotion. "I was younger then, just 18, and I didn't stand up for her. I let them take her away. I let them sell her like livestock, and I've regretted it every single day since." "Mr. Whitmore," Judge Morrison said carefully, "are you testifying that your sister's marriage was coerced?" "I'm testifying that it was forced. She had no choice. Blackwood held our father's debts, and father was threatened with debtor's prison if the money wasn't paid. Margaret was the payment." James looked at his sister with tears in his eyes. "I'm sorry, Maggie. I should have fought for you, should have helped you run, should have done something." Eliza was sobbing silently, her whole body shaking. Ethan put a hand on her shoulder, steadying her while she scribbled. "It wasn't your fault. You were just a boy." "I was old enough to know right from wrong," James said, reading over her shoulder. "And I chose wrong, but I'm choosing right now. If you need someone to testify that Blackwood's a monster, that he never should have had you in the first place, I'll say it under oath. I'll say it to anyone who'll listen." Judge Morrison was silent for a long moment, studying all the faces before him. Finally, he spoke. "Mr. Cole, show me this birthmark you mentioned. The one you claim proves paternity." Ethan unbuttoned his shirt and pulled it aside, revealing the crescent-shaped mark on his left shoulder. "My father had this. His father had it. It's been in our family for generations." "And the child?" "Nora," Ethan called softly. "Come here, sweetheart." Nora emerged from where she'd been sitting quietly with Samuel, her small face serious. She walked to Ethan without fear, and he gently moved her collar aside to show the identical mark on her neck. The judge leaned forward, comparing them carefully. "It's the same, exactly the same. Location is different, but the shape, the size, identical." "It's hereditary," Ethan said. "Passes down through blood. No other explanation for it." "There's one more thing," Thomas Brennan interjected. "Your Honor, I took the liberty of checking birth records in Silver Creek. Nora was born in March of 1881. Mr. Blackwood married Margaret Whitmore in November of 1880. That's only 4 months before the birth. Even accounting for early labor, the timeline doesn't work for Blackwood to be the biological father." Judge Morrison did the calculation in his head, his expression shifting. "You're right. The child had to be conceived before the marriage, or very shortly after. And given all this testimony about the relationship between Mr. Cole and Miss Whitmore before her marriage," he stopped, correcting himself. "Before Mrs. Blackwood's forced marriage. The evidence is compelling." "Your Honor, this is ridiculous." Blackwood's voice cut through the room. Nobody had noticed him enter, but there he stood in the doorway, flanked by 2 men in suits. "You're taking the word of disgruntled servants and a brother with an axe to grind over mine? I'm a respected businessman. You're a man who just tried to use forged legal documents to kidnap a child," Judge Morrison said coldly. "I have the forgery right here, Mr. Blackwood. Care to explain it?" Blackwood's confidence faltered. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't lie to me. I've been a judge for 20 years. I know a forgery when I see one." Morrison stood, his full authority behind every word. "Mr. Blackwood, based on the evidence presented today, I'm making the following rulings. First, I'm granting Eliza Blackwood a legal separation from you on grounds of coercion, fraud, and sustained cruelty. Second, I'm recognizing Ethan Cole as the biological and legal father of the child known as Nora and granting him full custody. Third, I'm issuing a restraining order forbidding you from approaching Mrs. Blackwood or the child within 100 yards. And fourth, his voice hardened, I'm referring this matter to the territorial marshal for investigation into the forged documents and your treatment of your wife. You can't do this. Blackwood's face went purple with rage. I have friends. I have influence. One word from me and your career is over. Then say your word, Mr. Blackwood, because my decision stands. Judge Morrison's voice was ice. Get out of my courtroom, now. For a moment, it looked like Blackwood might actually attack someone, his hands clenched into fists, his breathing ragged with fury. But the two marshals stationed outside had heard the commotion and moved to flank him, hands on their weapons. This isn't over, Blackwood hissed, but the threat rang hollow now. You think you've won? You've ruined yourselves, both of you. I'll make sure everyone knows what you are, an adulterer and a thief. I'd rather be an adulterer than a wife-beater, Ethan said quietly. Now get out. Blackwood left, shoving past the marshals with impotent rage radiating from every movement. The door slammed behind him, and the silence that followed felt like a collective exhale. Judge Morrison sat back down, suddenly looking very tired. Mrs. Blackwood, you're free. Legally, officially free. The separation grants you independent status. You can own property, enter contracts, make decisions for yourself. You're no longer under any man's authority. He turned to Ethan. Mr. Cole, congratulations. You're officially a father. The court recognizes your paternity and your custody. That little girl is yours by law now, not just by blood. Ethan felt something shift in his chest, something fundamental and permanent. Thank you, Your Honor. Don't thank me. Thank these people. Morrison gestured to the witnesses still gathered. They're the ones who had the courage to speak truth to power. That's rarer than it should be. James Whitmore approached Eliza cautiously, as if afraid she might bolt. Maggie, can we talk? I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but... Eliza cut him off by throwing her arms around him, sobbing against his shoulder. He held her carefully, his own tears falling into her hair, years of regret and grief pouring out between them. I've got a house in Silver Creek, James said when they finally pulled apart. It's yours if you want it, both of you. I know you probably want to stay with Cole, but if you ever need somewhere else, somewhere that's just yours, Eliza was writing before he finished. Thank you, but I think we're staying here, if Ethan will have us. If I'll have you? Ethan's voice was thick. Eliza, you're not going anywhere, either of you. This is home now, for as long as you want it. The legal proceedings took another 2 hours, paperwork, signatures, official stamps. By the time they finished, it was late afternoon and Nora had fallen asleep against Ethan's shoulder, exhausted by the day's emotions. Thomas Brennan refused payment for his services, saying that some cases were worth more than money. Samuel Pritchard insisted they stay with him in town that night rather than risk the dark road home. They accepted, too tired to argue, and spent the evening in Samuel's warm kitchen while he and James traded stories about Margaret before her marriage. The girl who'd loved to dance, who'd been kind to everyone, who'd dreamed of having a farm and a family and a life of her own choosing. She would have been happy with you, James said to Ethan as the night wore on. Even then I could see it, the way she looked at you. I'd never seen her look at anyone like that before. I would have married her, Ethan said quietly. If I'd known what was coming, I would have taken her and run that very night, would have given up everything to keep her safe. You did keep her safe, James said. Eventually. That's what matters. Eliza, sitting beside Ethan with Nora asleep across her lap, reached for his hand. When he looked at her, she mouthed 2 words. Thank you. He squeezed her hand gently. Always. They returned to the ranch 2 days later, giving Blackwood time to clear out of the territory. Word had spread fast. The territorial marshal had indeed opened an investigation, and several of Blackwood's friends were suddenly very interested in distancing themselves from him. His business connections were severing, his political influence evaporating. By the time Ethan, Eliza, and Nora rode home, Blackwood had left Silver Creek entirely, reportedly headed back east where his damaged reputation might not have spread yet. The ranch looked different somehow, though nothing had physically changed. Maybe it was knowing they were safe now, knowing they could stay without looking over their shoulders, without fear of being torn apart. Spring came slowly that year, the snow taking its time about melting. But eventually the drifts receded, revealing brown grass that would soon turn green. The creek thawed and began to run again. Birds returned, filling the air with sound after months of winter silence. Ethan taught Nora to ride properly, starting her on the gentlest mare. He taught her about ranching, about caring for animals, about reading weather and land and all the skills she'd need to survive in this country. She soaked it all up like parched ground drinking rain, asking endless questions and remembering every answer. Eliza's voice never returned, but she found other ways to communicate. Her written notes became less fearful, more playful. She started leaving little messages around the house for Ethan to find. "Thank you for the firewood. The roof still leaks. I made your favorite for dinner." And sometimes, late at night when Nora was asleep, she would write longer letters about her feelings, her fears, her slowly growing hope that maybe, just maybe, they could build something real from the wreckage of the past. One evening in late April, Ethan found her in the garden she'd started planting. She'd cleared a patch near the house and was working the soil with fierce determination, her sleeves rolled up, dirt under her fingernails. She looked up when his shadow fell across her work, and she smiled. An actual smile, open and unguarded. "That's going to be beautiful," Ethan said, looking at the neat rows she'd laid out. Eliza pulled out the papers she always kept in her pocket now. "I want to grow vegetables and flowers. I want this place to feel alive." "It already does, because you're here." She looked at him for a long moment, something shifting in her expression. Then she set down her tools and stood, brushing dirt from her hands. She pulled out her pencil and wrote carefully. "I need to tell you something. I've been thinking about it for weeks, and I need to say it." "All right. I loved you. 7 years ago, I loved you. And then I lost you, lost myself, lost everything. I spent so many years just surviving, just trying to keep Nora safe, that I forgot what it felt like to actually live. To want things. To hope." She paused, wrote more. "But being here, with you, I'm remembering. And I think I'm falling in love with you again. Or maybe I never stopped. I don't know. But I needed you to know that." Ethan's throat tightened. "Eliza." She held up a hand, stopping him. More writing. "You don't have to say anything back. I know this is complicated. I know I'm still legally married, even if separated. I know I'm broken in ways that might never heal, but I wanted you to know how I feel, because you deserve honesty. You've given us everything, and the least I can give you is truth." Ethan took the paper from her hands and set it aside. Then, slowly, giving her every opportunity to step back, he cupped her face in his hands. "You're not broken. You're one of the strongest people I've ever met. And I loved you 7 years ago, too. Never stopped. Even when I thought I'd never see you again. So if you're falling in love with me again, then we're falling together. And this time, nothing is going to pull us apart." He kissed her then, gentle and careful, and she melted into him with a small sound that might have been a sob or a laugh, or both. When they pulled apart, tears were streaming down her face. But she was smiling. They married that summer, a quiet ceremony with just Samuel, James, and a few neighbors as witnesses. Nora stood between them, holding both their hands, beaming with a happiness that transformed her into the child she'd never been allowed to be before. The ranch flourished under their combined efforts. Eliza's garden produced vegetables and flowers in abundance. Ethan's herd grew. Nora learned to read and write and ride, growing strong and confident and fearless. The house that had been too big for one lonely man became exactly the right size for a family of 3. On a quiet evening in late autumn, with the first frost painting the windows and a fire crackling in the hearth, Eliza sat at the table writing while Ethan whittled and Nora practiced her letters. The scene was so peaceful, so achingly normal, that Ethan had to stop and just look at them. His wife, his daughter, his family. Eliza glanced up, caught him staring, and raised an eyebrow in question. "Just thinking," Ethan said, "about that night you showed up in the snow. How different everything could have been if I hadn't opened the door. Eliza wrote quickly. But you did open it, that's what matters. I almost didn't. I stood there with my hand on the latch, thinking it was probably trouble. And it was trouble. Just not the kind I expected. Good trouble? Nora asked, looking up from her letters. The best trouble, Ethan confirmed. The kind that changes everything for the better. Eliza smiled and wrote one more note, holding it up. We were all lost before that night, and then we found each other. Found home. Found family, Ethan added. Found love, Eliza wrote. Nora, not to be left out, carefully wrote her own message in her childish hand. Found happy. And that was the truest thing of all. Years later, long after Nora had grown and started her own family, after Eliza had filled journals with the stories she couldn't speak aloud, after Ethan had built their ranch into something that would last for generations, people would ask how it all began. The answer was simple. It began with a knock on a door, a child's desperate plea, a woman's silent courage, and a man who chose to fight for strangers who turned out to be everything he'd been missing. It began with 3 broken people finding each other in a Montana blizzard and deciding that broken didn't mean beyond repair. That family wasn't always about blood and birth, but about choice and commitment and showing up day after day. It began with love, lost and found and fought for and earned. The ranch stood for 3 generations after that winter night, and the story was passed down each time. The story of how a child knocked in the snow and a broken house became a home that lasted. How silence found its voice through love. How 3 lost souls became a family that nothing could tear apart. And on clear winter nights, when the snow fell soft and steady, the descendants of Ethan Cole and Eliza Blackwood would look out at the Montana wilderness and remember. Remember that sometimes the greatest gifts come disguised as trouble. That opening your door to strangers might mean opening your heart to family. That the best stories don't end, they just begin again with each new generation. The ranch endured, the love endured, and the memory of one desperate night when everything changed endured most of all. Because some stories are worth remembering, some choices are worth celebrating, and some families are worth fighting for, no matter the cost. This was one of those stories, and it was true.